Hey, are you having trouble getting started on your museum paper? It's coming up. I have some ideas for you. The first thing that you need to do is choose your artwork. Make sure that the artwork is downloadable so that you can put it into your paper. You need to also make sure you know the artist, the title, the date, the medium, the size, and where you got it. The next thing that you should do is get your paper ready, set your format. You need 12-point font and 1-inch margins. I did a little example myself, and the first thing that I did was I put in my artwork. This is my artwork. I'm looking at and writing about Paul Cézanne. He's done a lot of paintings of his gardener. His gardener has been with him for a long, long time, and all of the paintings are all done out in the garden. And this is one of the last ones that Paul Cézanne painted before he died. So the first thing I did is I put that artwork in on my paper so that I could look at it while I was describing it. Right now, I'm just put in my notes, my describing notes about each element. And so I started off with just writing in the elements. I put all the elements down right here, and then I wrote them out again below, and I left a blank. So I put line and then a blank and color and then a blank. And I did that for all of the elements because you need to write describing sentences and paragraphs about each and every element. Also, the design principles. And here down further, I had the design principles, all of them, all written out. And then I did the same thing. I wrote down each design principle and left a blank. And I also was thinking about which design principles that I'm going to be writing about because not every artwork is going to have all of the design principles. So I got started first. I put down line and I started looking at lines, and I noticed right off the bat that there are a lot of lines and contour lines around the gardener, around his clothes, around his chair, around his shoes. And then there's also lines throughout the tree. I'm thinking this is a tree behind him. And then the brush strokes themselves, the way that he's painted the colors, all have kind of implied lines as well. So I described all of that. I'm not writing sentences. I'm just looking at the artwork and describing each element and putting all my notes down. Next, I looked at the color, and I noticed that all of the colors kind of blend together. They're analogous colors. And I wrote about that. And the texture came next. So I looked at the texture, thinking about how he's made these brushstrokes. These brushstrokes are an important part of this painting. They're all over the place. And these brushstrokes in the background here and over here are all smaller and depicting, I think, the leaves from the trees and the bushes behind the gardener. And then there's also some more brushstrokes over in the sky and on the wall and on the ground and on the gardener himself. So there's an all over kind of texture to this painting by his use of brushstrokes. Value, I notice that there's some lights and darks. There's a lot of dark around the gardener. He seems to be the lightest part of the painting. And I talked about the space, how he's in front and the tree is behind, and behind the tree is a wall, I'm thinking, and behind the wall is the sky. So there's a lot of space, there's some depth there. Even though he hasn't shown us a lot of details, I can still see that there's some things in front and some things behind. And then I started looking at the design principles, and I started thinking, okay, which ones do I notice? I notice emphasis right away. Here, front and center, the gardener, nice and big. There's the emphasis right there. And hello, that's the name of the painting, The Gardener. And then the other design principle that I was looking at was repetition. And again, those brushstrokes over and over and over again, some small, some little, some broader strokes, some shorter strokes. lots and lots of repetition of color, repetition of those lines, repetition of those brushstrokes. So yes, lots of repetition. Then contrast again, where we're talking about the lights and the darks, right? There's a light on all around the gardener and the darks surrounding him. And then what else? Oh, I know, movement. Is there movement in this artwork? Yes, I can see it. It looks like this toe is just right out in front and I could reach out and grab it. And it goes in a nice diagonal straight up his leg. And then sort of there's more little softer diagonals around his arm. So lots of movement sort of getting me into that painting and moving me all around. And then the last principle that I am writing about in this paper on the gardener is unity. Again, those brushstrokes, again and again, all over the ness of those brushstrokes. And so what I found is the more I started looking at the elements and thinking about each part of the elements and trying to describe them and really notice that I started thinking about more and more what this painting is about, right? So all these brushstrokes, this gardener, lots of paintings of this gardener, and I started thinking how there's blending of the colors and there's the blending of the brushstrokes. And I was thinking that maybe what Cezanne is thinking about is how his gardener sort of blends in with his background, how his gardener is part of that garden, part of that environment. That's what I'm thinking. And so there's a really big advantage of learning this technique of looking at something very carefully, putting all the little pieces together and figuring out for yourself without having someone to tell you what it's about, where it's from, the history behind it, but putting those pieces together for yourself and figuring it out on your own. So that's good for looking at paintings, that's good for looking at any kind of artwork, but it's also good for all kinds of things in your everyday life, right? So anyway, so once I've described all this, I'm not finished. You notice these are not complete sentences, these are just descriptions. But just with this descriptions and double spaced, I have about 3 pages. Now, all I need to do is go back into this paper and flesh out all of these elements and string all those sentences together, and boom, I got more than 5 pages, I'm sure. And then the last thing you need to do is on page 6, make sure that you put your artwork and the information about your artwork. So that's page 6. The writing is 1 through 5. Well, I hope that helps. I hope that helps get you started if you haven't already gotten started. If you have any questions or problems, please email me. And I can't wait to read your papers.